Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Brianna Halliday, and I'm a professor of economics at Eastern Connecticut State University. Economics is a field with many specialties, and students can pick the areas that they are most drawn to. My area of research is behavioral and experimental economics. One of the things I like about this area is that it allows me to do experiments with students in my classes. Let me tell you a little bit more about my specialty. Standard economic theory assumes individuals are purely rational and selfish beings. It is assumed that individuals undertake optimal decisions that maximize their own payoffs. What happens when actual individual behavior contradicts standard economic theory? Behavioral economics incorporates alternative assumptions about human behavior and has grown in popularity in the past decades, including Nobel Prize winners. Behavioral economics allows a more flexible interpretation of standard economic theory that has been found to better reflect actual observed individual decisions. While the models in behavioral economics provide fascinating insights despite its relatively new development, it is critical to perform direct tests of the validity of these models to further reinforce the conclusions drawn and the importance of this emerging subfield of economics. As behavioral economics grew in popularity, simple thought experiments performed by psychologists formed the basis for many of the models. Pioneering work in experimental economics goes back at least as far as 1962, which opened the door for publishing research involving experimental economics. The modern tool of experimental economics really gained steam in the 1980s and early 1990s. The rise of laboratory experiments facilitated direct tests and helped fuel the tremendous expansion of behavioral economics in the past 30 years. Experimental economics and behavioral economics have evolved into well-respected and useful methods and tools that continue to develop today. Quite a few universities now have an experimental economics laboratory, including Eastern, and offer courses as well. While behavioral economics and experimental economics are largely aligned and share many similarities, they also share differences. On one level, behavioral economics is a collection of theories and models, while experimental economics is a tool. Behavioral economic theoretical predictions do not always match behavior observed in the laboratory. Economic experiments are not needed to answer every research question in behavioral economics, and indeed cannot, while not every economic experiment is designed to answer a research question in behavioral economics. The clear union of behavioral and experimental economics allows for a continual growth of knowledge. Behavioral models are refined through observed behavior in the laboratory, and observed laboratory behavior yields new behavioral models. Behavioral and experimental economics can very much follow a cycle. Both have become valuable tools to policymakers around the world. Many governments have formed specific groups composed of economists who specialize in behavioral and experimental economics. For example, the Behavioral Insights Group in the United Kingdom. Before the introduction of experimental economics, policymakers typically relied on theoretical predictions, results from previous policy interventions, and intuition. The introduction of economic experiments allowed for the initial testing of proposed policy interventions prior to a full implementation. Policymakers can now test policy interventions based on theoretical predictions and can also design policy interventions without a theoretical basis using economic experiments both inside the laboratory as a testbed and in the field. While some policy interventions are too complex to be tested using an experiment, the inclusion of behavioral considerations in policy recommendations has also led to many successful interventions. Through the next few slides, I want to introduce you to a few behavioral and experimental economic concepts and tools and how they might apply in your own everyday lives. This example is extremely relevant today as we face a global pandemic. Imagine that there is a new outbreak of the plague and there are 2 possible vaccines to contain the outbreak. Vaccine A will result in losing 10 out of every 100 lives, while vaccine B will save 90 out of every 100 lives. In a study where individuals were asked which vaccine they would prefer, maybe not surprisingly, vaccine B was selected the majority of the time. If we take a closer look, vaccine A and vaccine B are actually identical. Vaccine A and vaccine B simply differ in the framing of their success rates. This is called the framing effect. The framing effect is a cognitive bias where people decide on options based on whether the options presented with positive or negative connotations. In this example, because vaccine A is described as causing a loss of life, individuals shy away from it and prefer the more positive sounding vaccine B despite the success rates being identical. Imagine that you win $10, and now imagine that you lose $10. While I think we all agree that we would prefer to win $10 versus lose $10, would you give up the chance to possibly win the $10 to avoid the chance of losing the $10? Loss aversion is the tendency to prefer avoiding losses to acquiring equivalent gains. Put another way, losses loom larger than gains. Sometimes losing the same amount hurts more than the positive feelings from gaining the same amount. Each of us has our own individual risk preference. Some of us shy away from risk, and some of us like to face risk head on. Because this is economics, we will focus on financial risk. This task is one example of a simple risk elicitation task used in experimental economics to figure out an individual's risk preference. This task consists of 10 individual hypothetical decisions. Each decision is a paired choice between option A and option B. You will make 10 choices, 1 choice per row. Take a look at row number 1. Option A pays $2 with 10% probability, and it pays $1.60 with 90% probability. Option B yields $3.85 with 10% probability, and it pays 10 cents with 90% probability. The other decisions are similar, except that as you move down the table, the chances of the higher payoff for each option increase. In fact, for the bottom row, each option pays the highest payoff with 100% probability. So your choice here is between $2 or $3.85. To summarize, you will make 10 choices. For each row, you will have to choose between option A and option B. You may choose A for some decision rows and B for other rows, and you may change your decisions and make them in any order. For each row, write down whether you prefer option A or option B. Take a second to pause the video and complete this task. Take a look at your answers. At what point did you switch from option A to option B? Count up how many times you selected option A. Using the table on your screen, you can get an idea of your individual risk preference. Standard economic theory assumes that all individuals are risk neutral, but behavioral and experimental economic research proves otherwise. Standard economic theory assumes that all individuals are selfish and make decisions that are purely self-interested. Standard economic theory does not leave any room for charitable giving, fairness concerns, or positive reciprocity. I think we can all agree that standard economic theory is missing a huge chunk of human interaction on this one. Enter behavioral and experimental economics. In 2018, Americans gave over $400 billion to charities, clearly violating standard economic theory. Additionally, research shows that individuals are willing to give up their own compensation to both positively and negatively reciprocate towards another individual. Research shows that if someone helps us, we will help them even if we have to give up something of our own. But if someone takes advantage of us, we will use given opportunities to punish those individuals, even at our own expense. All of this research shows proof that individuals exhibit social preferences and therefore violate standard economic theory. I hope that this presentation has been both fun and informative, just like studying economics at Eastern. Here are some additional resources if you'd like to delve a little deeper into the world of behavioral and experimental economics. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out.